Discover a world between mountain and sea. Find yourself in the lap of luxury, in a place where time behaves differently and abides by its own set of rules. Celebrate a nation by living in a home that exemplifies a country. Taste and embrace a culture. Allow yourself to be hosted by a family and tended by the best. An oasis in the heart of the mother city. Now, imagine this house is yours. Ellerman House, 25 years of excellence.
Very good evening, warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. And there was a quick look at the home of Dan Really Likes Wine in Cape Town when we're down there. That is Ellerman House. It's one of my favorite places anywhere in the world to stay for all manner of reasons. The villas are the size of Malawi. They've got splendid views. The food is terrific. They've got the great art collections on the planet, and they've got some of the loveliest people of anywhere I get to stay. So I always love going. But the main reason is they have as ridiculous a cellar as any establishment anywhere has. Not only is it an architectural triumph, but the sheer volume of world-class wine makes it somewhere I'd cheerfully be locked in for the rest of my life, although it wouldn't be a terribly long life given the amount of amazing wine in there and my powers of self-control. But up until now, all of that wine was wine that came from elsewhere. It was wine with the names of established estates and labels and brands and winemakers. There wasn't anything that was personal, anything in-house. But now that's changed because a new wine has been added to that Ellerman cellar, and it's a wine that comes with the signature of an establishment that is known for its sense of luxury and its sense of allure. So does that translate into the wine? Well, let's get into the story and welcome the guests who form the first part of the show. A little later on in the show, we're going to be heading into the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley and catching up with Craig Wessels, who's got his Chardonnay and Pinot Noir to share with us. We'll try and squeeze out a little chat about the Cabernet Sauvignon. But we start with this extraordinary collaboration and a wine simply called the Ellerman, and say a very good evening to some great friends of mine, Wayve Kolevsohn and Manny Cabello, which is how they pronounce it in Chile, from Ellerman House, and Erika Obermeyer, the architect of this wine. Good evening, guys. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Good evening.
Hello, Dan and Team Ellerman.
It's lovely to see you all, and in particular, Erika, thank you for taking time out of harvest, because I know it's a particularly crazy time of the year. Wayve, I know you're taking time out from lots of hard work, and I know Manny normally has just finished his siesta and is about to start his massage this time. So thank you too, Manny, for that sense of sacrifice. Now, I'd like you, Manny, to kick us off with a little bit of a backstory, because it is such an exciting story, but also I'd imagine quite a challenging one, because the nature of Ellerman House suggests you have to do something pretty special. How did the idea of the wine come about, and what led you up to the point of, let's give Erika a call?
Okay, hi everyone. I think the need for us to make a wine, Dan, was always there. We've always been challenged to kind of produce our own wine. We don't own farms. And I think until beginning of 2018, I think, or later 2017, we got a guest from America, which was retired, but was very involved in California in terms of wines. And it challenged us a little bit to the point that is, we say, actually, we are actually making a wine, which we were not. So say, you know what, we're making a wine, it's going to be amazing. We're going to send you a bottle sample in 6 months, which was all lie. We were not making anything at that point. But it was a challenge to make a great product. You know, as you know, Ellerman House always been very, very proud to whatever we do, whatever we touch, you got to be the best without compromise. So to make a wine, it was never going to be an exception for it. So we thought about it, how to go about, and probably a couple of months later, Erika rocked into Ellerman House to introduce her wines, and we tasted some of her wines, and well, that's kind of the end of the story. I mean, we kind of fall in love with the wine, and she amazing accommodated us to kind of tweak a little bit of her wines and her vineyards, and to produce, I think, an amazing wine. The idea was to create the best possible wine, that's red wine that we can produce, but also wine with a sort of a sense of place, who we are. You gotta be fresh, you gotta be balanced, you gotta be no pretenders, you gotta be amazing taste, and light and elegant. So I think that's in that brief, Erika, I mean, can't think of any better product that couldn't come up with. So it was an amazing, I mean, it's fantastic what she came out and she produced.
Well, we're going to try some of that in just a moment and get Erika to introduce us to the thought process. Before we do that, though, Wayne, as a sommelier with time around the world, particularly at Ellerman for the last while, and knowing Ellerman House so well, knowing what it represents, what the ethos of Ellerman House was, did you kind of have an idea in your mind as to what an Ellerman House wine should be, what the Ellerman should represent, and what style and kind of wine should be produced to capture that spirit of the world's finest luxury boutique hotel?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, going in line with everything that Ellerman House stands for, we wanted a wine that was of the best quality, a wine that worked incredibly well with food, a wine that was versatile with food, as our menu is constantly changing, and I think something that would leave you thinking of Ellerman House. You know, I always say, like, we are so lucky to work at Ellerman House, because the guests that come to stay here are probably the happiest that they will ever be. I mean, when you're sitting on the beautiful terrace watching the sunset, drinking a glass of wine, and the idea was for them to be able to drink the wine here at Ellerman House, and then later on to be able to buy it here, take it home, or buy it in their own country, open it up at home, and remember that incredible time that they spent here. So I think it was something that I think would carry on the Ellerman journey, not just here, but when they're at home as well. And yeah, I think that's what Erika has produced.
It makes for quite a challenging brief. Manny's outlined what that brief was. You reinforced just what sort of elements you'd be looking for. Erika, the last few years have been positively rock star for you, and you've had so much fun, had so much success. But despite all of that, despite feeling on top of the wine world, as I'm sure you must have over the last few years, how daunting was it to get this particular invitation to make a wine that captures Ellerman House?
I think it was a very easy challenge. I'm really one that take challenges in my stride, but I think the whole story of the Ellerman is such a unique and such an incredible privilege to tell, and especially telling it in a fine wine, because I think it's hugely important to capture the story of the vineyard and kind of match that with the personality of Ellerman. It's an incredible team. They know exactly what they want. They're easy to work with. So it kind of unfolded very naturally, and it was one of the best projects I've ever worked on. So it was kind of easy. It wasn't that difficult at all.
And I suppose having taken that big leap to say goodbye to Graham Beck, charge off on your own and do so well, did arm you with plenty of confidence, which is translated into this wine. And we have the first two vintages, the 18 and the 19. They're big, stylish bottles. They've got a sense of gravitas to them. They just look really good, which is kind of important when it is Ellerman House. What was the thinking in terms of the blend that we have here, and why that would be the right style of wine to make?
I think, the most important thing that I tried to capture in this one was elegance. I think Ellerman in itself, the beautiful art, just the location, sitting there and experiencing so much of what South Africa can give us as a traveler, as South Africans. And that was kind of the brief that I worked on. For me, it's important to capture all that elegance and really make the vineyard sing in this. So we tried to build something that was very unique, but also in a sense showcasing the diversity of our beautiful winelands. And it kind of came together because we worked with different vineyards from all around the Western Cape, and they all just came together and created this incredible wine that, in a way, is such a good match to everything that you get to experience when you visit Ellerman.
When you look at the blend, it does suggest to you that you're going to get something that is particularly elegant, touch shy of 60% Syrah. You've got some Cinsault, some Grenache Noir, just a little bit of Cab for a bit of muscle and character. But everything points to the style of wine you have just described. Manny, when you poured yourself that first glass, what was the response?
Yeah, it was amazing. The first time we started making the wine, obviously, when we start tasting the final product, because we taste in this very room, we were doing blendings and we blend, I don't know, the first vintage probably like 4 times, and then obviously Erika keep doing it on her side, and then the first time we tasted, like, wow, first I knew it was something great coming out, and we were not in a rush. This 2018, we only launched it last year, and maybe important to say, we didn't tell anyone about it. I mean, it's just a very small a project that we were doing on site without actually sharing with anyone on site. And the more we go and we taste, the more amazing the wine tastes. So yeah, it was always balanced from the beginning, but I think it exceeded the expectations of initially I had with the vintage. So I mean,
which is quite a comment to make, because you spend every day tasting, drinking, sampling some of the best world in the wine as it makes its way into or out of the Ellerman House cellar. So that's high praise indeed, Erika. What about you, Wayve? When you had that first glass, in terms of what you were expecting, did it match those expectations? Did it exceed them? What was your first impression?
Yeah, I mean, I automatically just assumed that it would be quite a punchy, quite a fuller style of wine. But I mean, having tasted Erika's wines before, I shouldn't probably have expected that. It was very elegant, but it had a lot of structure, a lot of concentration. Yeah, and I was really happy with what we blended in the initial stages of it.
Well, I poured my first glass of that 2018, the maiden vintage, which I had a first taste of late last year down at a charity event. Erika, I've got it in glass. For those people watching on Enviously, and I suspect there are many of them, talk us through that 2018 vintage and give us a little detail on it.
Oh, the 2018 was one of the most challenging vintages I've ever worked with, but I think when nature throws you a huge challenge, kind of are more alert to what is out there. And I spend a lot of time in the vineyards. We're writing vintage 2021 currently, and it's just such a privilege to be able to write the story of a particular vintage. So 2018 was tough in terms of, it was the third year running in terms of very extreme drought. This wine comes from a base of Stellenbosch vineyards. So Stellenbosch in 2018 had like really good concentration, very tiny berries. The yields weren't that much lower. Like outside with the more dryland vineyards, we had very, very small crop. So 18 was very challenging in terms that the vineyards started to stress early, and it was very, very important to bring the fruit in before we saw any stress. Because I think something that is definitely part of the style is to capture that fruit and the freshness together with the elegance. And 18 kind of, you had to be out there every day and taste. So it was a challenging vintage, but I find 18 to be one of the best red wine vintages. I think we also very focused on 2015 and 17 as a great vintage, but I think we're going to be very surprised with what 18 has in store for us.
The challenges pertain, amongst other things, to drought, and that would have given you the added task of working out where grapes were available, what you could get. In terms of what we're drinking here, where did you find the particular parcels? What have we got in this bottle?
Yeah. So it's Syrah based. I wanted to showcase Stellenbosch in particular for more elegance in the Syrah. So it's from the Lower Helderberg. It sits right next to the False Bay Rim, so it does benefit from that coastal influence, very slow ripening, and we're able to ripen the tannin structure fully. It's a big tannin structure because they grow in coffee stone soils, decomposed granite soils, and they just give you this very linear tannin and a big tannin, but when we're able to fully ripen them, you just have a tannin that ages so beautiful. So then we venture a little bit more inland to get those beautiful pockets of Cinzo, very old vineyards, bush vine vineyards, unirrigated. And they kind of add a lot of freshness and acidity to the wine and fruit. I always compare putting up a little red lipstick to blending with Cinzo. The Grenache component adds that grainy tannin. It's got a lot of fruit, but it kind of builds onto the Syrah structure. So in itself, it brings in these layers. So it's a very elegant wine and maybe not as big in terms of extraction, but it's got so many layers. And the beauty is that all these different components will kind of take on a different personality in every single sip you take. So the Cabernet made such a huge difference to this wine. It's 90 percentages from our maiden vintage 6% to 3% in the 2019 vintage. But the minute you add that Cabernet Sauvignon, just kind of bring the wine together, and it adds gravitas. And we all know that Cabernet is just that strong tannin structure. So it's kind of trying to find the best of that particular characteristic of the varietals and kind of taste them and blend them so that they ultimately produces a better product than individual taste from the barrel.
You've preempted what my follow-up question was going to be, which was about that Cabernet Sauvignon. People who look at this, reading the back of the label, the 2019, which you'll taste now, you've already said it's got 3% Cabernet Sauvignon. Look at it, how can 3% make a difference? Why even bother? And yet, despite the fact that it's such a tiny fraction of the wine, it's clearly having a big voice in what the end product is.
Yes, definitely. The Syrah and the Cabernet is from the Lower Helderberg. So in particular, those tannin structure on the granitic soils are just incredible. The soils are so beautiful that we're able to ripen fruit fully. We get at least 2 extra weeks on the vine. It's much cooler than Midtown Stellenbosch, on average on a warm day, at least 5 degrees Celsius. But the brightness of this fruit with the Voorpaardeberg Grenache and Achterpaal Cinsault, it's just incredible because it adds that brightness, it tones down the tannin structure. But we need a little bit of the Cabernet to just bring it together. And it's always a big laugh when we do the blend. It's such a little small volume that we actually can't use in the blending. We just add it by bucket. And you think that 2 buckets won't make a difference, but it just brings the wine together, and I think the ageability of the wine is much better because of that fact.
A couple of people watching on. Lisa Harlow, how lucky are Ellerman House? Erika makes some of my favorite wines. You're certainly not alone there, Lisa. There are many Erika Obermeyer fans. Erika is also someone who does something a little differently. Many of our winemakers are still men. She is a star winemaker who's a woman, but her PA is actually a man. And Neil Hermes wanting to know, what's for dinner, Erika, from behind his secretarial desk. And then Greg Sherwood, who was with us last night on the South African Wine Tribe across the UK, saying, hello, Erika, another one of our great wine champions. Wayve from the 18 to the 19. They're both 2 fabulous wines. What do you make of the difference, the similarity between the 2? And dare I ask you for a favorite?
Well, for me, the 18, I think the cab adds a little bit more structure in the 18, but the 19 is showing a lot more of that like beautiful bright red fruit. Also very evident what a year in the bottle difference makes. I mean, the 18, I've been lucky to be able to taste it almost daily over the last couple of months, and it's just changed so much over the last few months. So for me, right now, I'm preferring the 18. But let's wait and see how the 19 develops as time goes by. Yeah. Although the percentages are still the same, I'm getting more of the Cinsault on that 19, whereas the cab has just got a slightly more of a voice in the 18. But that is youth as well, and one of the beauties of wine is the way it changes. Manny, there'll be people watching this going, this wine looks amazing, I must have some. Is there a way that ordinary, everyday people can get hold of it?
Absolutely. I mean, just come and see us. Come and visit us. That's one way. We have it available on our restaurant. It's also available in Portugal right now, and soon will be available in America as well. So yeah, we got a lot to share still. We did around 3,000 bottles of the 19, and we got some left from the 18, which was a World 5-star from Plate, which is quite happy about it. We are our first vintage, so yeah, we have some to share, and we will continue going forward for 2020 now.
And you have partly answered the other question I wanted to ask you. Ellerman House is known for the extraordinary guest list you can look back upon, everybody from the Clintons to Oprah Winfrey to Federer and Nadal. I think you've had assorted Kardashians in and out of the place from time to time. There is a real exclusivity to Ellerman House, but people are still able to come around, have a meal, have a glass of wine, and even if they're not actually staying there, still get some of the Ellerman experience, including a glass of the new wine.
Yeah, well, definitely we're more flexible right now due to the tourism being so affected with international traveling. So yeah, definitely more flexible, and we really want to share what we can do. A lot of people don't know what we do, and it's a pity. So yeah, just try it. Just give us a call and we see. We're always going to keep it very small and exclusive and enough space for everyone, so everybody can get a personal service and enough space for everyone. But it's doable. Just let us know. Give us a call and come and try the wine.
I can't recommend a visit highly enough. Manny will look after you. Wayve will look after you as well. Just before we wrap up with Erika, Wayve, this is a terrific addition to the cellar. Big and amazing and incredible cellars, nothing new to you from your work in the Maldives, your work in the test kitchen, time in Europe. You've been all over the world. You've seen incredible cellars. There is just something, though, about the Ellerman House cellar, the combination of the aesthetic, the sheer volume of wine, the quality therein, that must make it stand out, even for somebody like you who's seen so many cellars and traveled around the wine world.
Yeah, well, I mean, with regards to, I think, our cellar and our guests visiting our cellar, you need to come and have a look at our beautiful wine gallery. You can join us for dinner. We host dinners in the wine gallery. And then, yeah, I mean, just to go back to the wine very quickly, I've had the opportunity to try it with a lot of different dishes on the menu. I love it because it's so versatile. I think the Syrah and the Cinsault element adds this like beautiful, juicy fruit component, which works incredibly well. Not only with salty foods, with like slightly rare meats. The Grenache and the Cab, I think, add a little bit of texture. So I think even with anything that's a bit more full-bodied, some venison, springbok, ostrich, yeah, so an incredibly food-friendly wine, and I think that's just kind of in line with how it works with our menu as well. So, yeah.
Lots of fabulous wine, splendid people to give it to you, and in particular that Ellerman, which is the new headline act at Ellerman House. Erika, just before we bid the three of you farewell, I know it's a crazy harvest time. We spoke about harvest about a month or so ago. How are you looking? How are the grapes coming in? How crazy, busy, mad, happy, stressed out is Erika Obermeyer at the moment?
I'm extremely happy. It's the best time of the year, and vintage challenging in the sense that it started so late. I harvested my Sauvignon Blanc. I didn't understand that. Sorry, serious talking to me. Yeah, so 2021 will go down as a vintage that we waited for a very long time. Sauvignon Blanc coming in on the 26th of February is almost unfold off. But there's a little bit of even ripeness, so we're doing a lot of selective harvesting, but the fruit that's coming into this area will be beautiful.
And it'll all end up in more terrific wine. A little of it in the Ellerman, the majority of it under the Erika Obermeyer label. But go quickly, because this wine sells out very, very fast indeed. Guys, thank you very, very much for joining us. It's such an exciting wine. Manny, Wayve, really appreciate the chance to try it out. And Erika, thank you for giving it to us. And as always, it won't be too long before I'm back down in the Cape and back at Ellerman drinking more wine and enjoying one of my favorite spots to hang out. So to all three of you, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the evening. And in particular, Erika, happy harvesting.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, Ellerman House. Well.
So there we go. Manny Cabello, who's, I think he's probably Chile's single greatest ever export. Forget Marcelo Rios or a couple of footballers. No, it is very firmly Manny. Wayve, who's been all over the world together, looking after the wine at Ellerman House with their team, and the wonderful Erika Obermeyer, whose story is just so inspiring and shows no sign of coming to an end anytime soon. Now, Erika's is a story that stands out. She was making wine at Graham-Beck. They decided to call time on the still wine and just focus on the Cup Classique and the Bubbles Ferreira. And instead of staying on as she could have, Erika took the plunge, went off on her own, and the rewards have been immense. She really is making some of the finest wine in South Africa at the moment. And so it makes for such a cool and compelling and different story, which is a rather nice lead-in to our second guest tonight, whose story is also of the slightly more unusual variety, not the standard path into winemaking in as much as there is one. Now, we're very lucky to get him because he spends most of his life on a surfboard, and much like people like the Newton-Johnsons, reluctantly makes wine in between catching waves. But he's not catching waves, he's catching the internet instead. And joining us from the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, Craig Wessels, Restless River. Good evening, welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Good evening, and thanks for having me, and good evening to anybody who might be tuning in. Good to be here.
We have to kick off with the important stuff, and I actually had a quick look through our files to confirm it, but I can confer upon you the status of the single greatest moustache we've ever had on Dan Really Likes Wine.
You know, it's harvest time, so the face gets neglected. That's all I can say.
All right, look, you do a very good impression of a Free State traffic cop, so keep it. Looks phenomenal. It's the moustache of the man who's making some of the most exciting wine in the country. You and Eric have got a lot in common there. You've also got in common the fact that your stories to where you've got stand out because they're so interesting. And I'm going to need a little more detail on yours, because I know there was this incredible film director who was wanted all over the world, in high demand, enormously successful, and instead decided it would be a very good idea to head off and waste as much money as possible trying to set up a wine business in the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley.
I guess it is kind of like that in some ways, but you know, to take it back a bit further, from sort of the late 90s, early 2000s, there was always this burning ambition to get deeper into wine. I love drinking wine, so you know, there was this, I guess, a spark that just needed to be ignited, which did eventually happen. And but yeah, the old life is pretty much that, the old life. And I suppose in some ways, you know, if you've ever read that book, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, well, I never had a Ferrari, but my wife and I pretty much gave up everything to pursue the wine side of things. So it comes, you know, it comes with a lot of time behind us, a lot of sacrifice, but it's certainly a burning desire to pursue it, and that's kind of how we've ended up where we are now.
And where you've ended up is wine that is traveling all over the world, and you've got a growing army of followers and devoted fans everywhere. But that's where you are now. It's not where you always were. How tough were those first few years, having said a goodbye in part to what you had been doing as a director? I know you still you hadn't given up the day job entirely, but trying to juggle those, trying to make the wine business work. How challenging was it? And was there ever a point where we thought maybe this isn't going to work?
It was actually quite easy in the beginning because I had no expectations. We had nothing to lose. So the hardest part was running 2 or 3 jobs. So I would do my regular work during the day, and I would do the winemaking and farming at nighttime. Well, I couldn't farm at night, but I'd be looking into everything at nighttime, weekends out in the vineyards. Fortunately, we were living on the farm, so at least the vineyards were close by. But yeah, it's kind of tough running 2 or 3 jobs. But there were no real expectations in terms of the wine side of it. At that stage in the beginning, I hadn't really planned a wine business. So I was basically making wine for friends and for my own consumption. And then you reach a point where you are making more than you can consume. And then you got to think, okay, well, what now? But at the same time, the grip starts to tighten on you, and well, on me anyway, and you know, we knew this was the way forward. So yeah, it was. It wasn't difficult in the sense that there was a lot of pressure, but it was certainly difficult in the sense of our time, resources. But I certainly wouldn't change anything.
Nor would anybody who's drunk your wine, which we're going to be doing in just a minute. I see Angela Lloyd watching on YouTube. Love Craig's t-shirt and his wine. He's cool as well. If you've got the Angela Lloyd stamp of approval, you know that your life's going pretty well there. And then a quick throwback to Erica Grant Saul saying Erica's Syrah and Cinsault wines are just amazing. They certainly are. In terms of the transition, Craig, from what seems like was almost a hobby when you started off to the fully fledged business it is now, was there a turning point? Was there a particular wine, a particular transaction, a particular review or score from a big judge that made you think that you turned the corner and you're now on the home straight to creating this success?
Yeah, you know, it's one of those old cliches where my overnight success has taken 17 years. I'm on my 17th vintage of Cab. And I think in many ways, it's our Cabernet Sauvignon, which is called Main Road and Dignity. That is very much the wine that put Restless River on the map. And the reason for it was that it was totally unexpected at the time for a Cabernet Sauvignon to come out of the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, which is traditionally a Pinot Noir Chardonnay area. So, most of my life I've spent swimming upstream, so making Cabernet in the Hemel-en-Aarde didn't seem like too much of a stretch, but it worked, and I think that was the turning point. Once wine lovers, critics, etc., picked up on that Main Road and Dignity, and realized that this was a single varietal Cabernet coming out of Hemel-en-Aarde. People really sort of sat up and took notice, and fortunately the wine was, it lived up to, I guess, the expectations of those palates, and it developed quite quickly, quite a following, and that's what set us on our path.
I want to come back to that Cabernet Sauvignon a little later because I find the story fascinating, but we're going to kick off with the wines for which we are a little more accustomed to finding in the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, the two lead Burgundians that are the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir. Before we try the Chardonnay and also get the story behind the name, which is beautiful, the discussion I've had with a couple of your Hemel-en-Aarde peers, the Newton-Johnsons, your fellow surfers, JP down at Creation, is that sense that it's time to shift away from this constant comparison of Hemel-en-Aarde versus Burgundy and accept the fact that Hemel-en-Aarde stands very much on its own feet, makes wines that are similar in style to what we find in Burgundy, but more than deserve now to just simply be known for what they are in themselves and the success that they've been able to achieve. Is that a fair assessment of where you think the Valley is at the moment?
I think it's a very fair assessment. I think it's really important for us not to be compared to Burgundy. After all, what is Burgundy? It's there's Côte de Noir, Côte de Nuit, Côte de Beaune, and it's a very large area. So when we say Burgundy, what exactly are we talking about? Because Hemel-en-Aarde has got 16 Pinot Noir Chardonnay producers growing grapes in here. So, it would be like a fraction of one small village in Burgundy. And so it's not really of much value to compare ourselves to Burgundy. However, I think there's a lot of value in benchmarking. So we know that a lot of Burgundian style wines or wines coming out of Burgundy are absolutely amazing wines. And of course, we use those as benchmarks. But over the last 15 years or so, we've become pretty comfortable with the fact that we're not Burgundy and we don't want to be Burgundy. And we're Hemel-en-Aarde, and our wines are good and they're distinctive. And we don't need to try and imitate something else. We're unique enough in our own sense. And I think that the wines generally speak for themselves, particularly given that it's one of the cooler wine growing areas in South Africa. So we already have that on our side. And it's great sometimes to be compared with Burgundy, but it's certainly not something that I think a lot of us are actively seeking. We just want people to enjoy our wine.
Give it about 10 years, I reckon, Craig, and you'll start seeing the reviewers saying things like, this Romani Conti is definitely up there with a Restless River Leluc. I think that's where Burgundy is heading. Let's go into the first of the two wines we're tasting. It is the Ave Marie. And Ave Marie, if I'm not mistaken, would be a teenager girl with a rather special place in your heart, Craig.
Yeah, Ave Marie is a gorgeous 17-year-old. My daughter, just let me clarify that. I mean, the thing about Restless River is that our wines are made from single vineyards, and they're made from the grapes that we farm. So we're very site specific, and it made sense to us that our wines were named after their vineyards. This is, I guess, a little bit of a Burgundian approach, but nevertheless, we feel very strongly about the farming, and we're spending 90% of our time here in the vineyards and probably 10% actually making the wines, if you add up your time over the year. So the vineyards are extremely important to us, and it's really important that our wines reflect the vineyards. That is the key thing about our wines, and that's what makes a Restless River wine different to any other wine, because you're drinking, let's say, Obermeyer, that vineyard. It's only 2 hectares. It's the only vineyard on this planet, on that patch of earth, or similar, and the wine will therefore be unique if it's made in such a way that allows the vineyard to express itself, and that's what we try and do.
Well, I've had my first sip. I think this got something daft, like 97 points from Platter, and probably the only question is where they dropped the other 3, because it's just an exceptional Chardonnay, and I'm far from being the only one to have said that. I see Daryl Balfour's just joining us, watching with a glass of Restless River Obermeyer at hand. There will be people who haven't tried this wine, either because they haven't heard of it, or more likely because they haven't been able to get hold of it because it gets bought up so quickly. For people who haven't had it, introduce from your perspective what it is that makes this wine quite so special, and has wine judges, wine critics around the world giving it the sort of scores and the sort of gushing accolades that they have been?
Look, I think it's all boils down to, like I mentioned earlier, the site. It really is a fantastic site. Because it's small as well, and I'm so hands-on in farming that site, I know the vineyard extremely well, down to the point where I know very small parcels within that 2-hectare block, and we are meticulously picking that 2-hectare block over a period of 10 days to 14 days. So we know it very well, and I think that attention to detail really is something that separates that wine. We're also very in touch with our coopers in France who make the barrels for us, because that's a significant part of Chardonnay. And I use coopers that share the same philosophy that I do in terms of craft and absolute sort of focus and dedication to making something of outstanding quality. And the key thing with Restless River Obermeyer Chardonnay is that it is very much driven by a strong line of acidity, which keeps the wine fresh. There's a purity to the wine. It's not too large from a fruit perspective or an oaking perspective. It's generally more restrained, quite focused, and unashamedly so. It's not what I would call a blockbuster or a crowd pleaser. It's something, and I guess a lot of our wines are like that. They are what I like to call intellectual wines. They require a little bit of thought, a little bit of understanding, but at the end of the day, wine's there to be enjoyed. And if that wine's going to give you pleasure, then I'm a happy guy.
I'm going to take issue with you there, because I don't think you're being entirely accurate or honest, Craig. It might not be. I understand what he says, not a blockbuster. I struggle to think of a crowd, though, who would not be pleased by drinking vast amounts of this particular Chardonnay. And I see I'm not alone there. Lisa Harlow over in the UK. It's a stunning Chardonnay. Wish it was early enough to pour here. It is always early enough or late enough or the right time to pour wine, Lisa. Don't let anybody ever tell you otherwise. And then the Newstead Lund family vineyards, we need to get onto the show. Well done, Restless River, Craig and Anne. So some support from your peers for what is a fabulous one, and one I've got no doubt makes your daughter enormously proud to have a name on it. She's not the only member of the family, though, celebrated with a bottle of wine. Slightly newer release. Introduce us to a young man called Luke and the bottle that he has inspired.
Yeah, so this Le Luc vineyard is a small 1.3 hectare vineyard, which translates to about 6,000 vines, planted on very, very beautiful soils, decomposed granite soils. And in terms of its name, it's really pretty simple. There was a vineyard there prior that I uprooted to plant Pinot. My son was 13 at the time, and he decided it would be a great idea if he had his name on a bottle of wine, and said he would like to name that vineyard. So we said, okay, sure, give it a name. And his name is Luke, and he decided on the name Le Luc. I don't quite know where he got that from, and I never really asked, but That's the name of the vineyard, and that's the name of that wine. Super vineyard, and it was planted in 2013, and he's 21. So yeah, I'm not sure what the maths is, but maybe 8 years, somewhere around there. Incidentally, he's off to Stellenbosch now to go and study winemaking. So there's hope for this estate yet.
Be a wonderful baton to pass on, I'm sure. And it is a name with great panache. It's wine that has got many fans, like the Chardonnay. Wellington Moromba saying the Leluc has always been part of my listing. Great quality, purity of fruit, and very enjoyable. And throwing back, I think this was the Chardonnay, Reginald Peck up at Cheetah Plains in the Sabi Sands. He's always a big fan of the show. If I'm not looking, the man with the moustache would be catching catfish. Ave Maria, one of a kind Burgundy on its own. What an immense wine crafting. My tears are the same as angels' tears, Craig. Just keep making what I call myriad wonder. Vino is just a way to love. So thank you, Reggie. Always sends through some wonderfully poetic messages from his home up at Cheetah Plains. From a winemaker's perspective, how much do you listen, play to, take to heart the critics? It's obviously fantastic when they rave about you. When they're not quite so enthusiastic, it's sometimes a little more difficult to deal with. How much does it affect you personally, and how much does it affect what you do with your wine going forward?
I think, look, I come from a creative background. Being a creative person, you generally are quite sensitive, I guess. But at the same time, you are always putting something out there that has a lot of yourself in it. So you get used to hearing feedback on something that you're putting out there in your own personal capacity. Sometimes it's difficult not to take it personally, but as you get older and wiser, you start to realize that you can't please all the people all the time. And then you get to a point where you don't really want to please all the people all the time, because I think that would be mediocrity. And you start to find your niche and be happy with where you're at. And as long as you're finding those people out there who are sharing your view and your taste, that's okay. So I tend not to really concern myself with what critics think of my wines. Obviously, it's great if they do like them, but if they don't like them, it's just not a wine for them. I think from a winemaker's perspective, to get back to what you asked me earlier on in that question, I'm not really too concerned about other wines out there and making wines similar to other wines out there, or listening to what other people have to say about how a wine should be or what I should be doing. I think it's more about understanding my vineyards, farming those vineyards as best I can, and then allowing that, like I said earlier in this piece, allowing that wine to express its sense of place in its vineyard. And that's really all I am. I actually call myself a yeast husband. It's yeast husbandry. The yeast is actually the thing making the wine. It's turning the juice into wine, and my job is just to look after it. And then once it's become wine, I'm there as a father to manage these wines inside the barrels or tanks or whatever they are in. The rest of my job is to be out there on the farm, in the vineyards, and making sure that I can grow the best quality fruit possible.
And of course, getting in as many waves as you possibly can between all of that. It's a very sensible philosophy, and a nice, simple one that is obviously working for you. You do mention husband, which is an appropriate time to bring up the real power behind the throne at Restless River. The partnership with Anne is far more than just husband and wife. It sits at the core of the business. Talk to us a bit about Anne involved, because she's set all of this up while you were out surfing, and how that's enabled Restless River to become what it is today.
Yeah, instrumental. Anne and I are a very strong team. Anne is very much my right-hand person on the farm, and she's my biggest critic. You asked earlier what I thought about what other people, critics, etc., may think of my wine, And I said, I don't really mind what they think. But my most nervous phase is when I take a new wine that I've made to Anne for the first time to taste. I'm more concerned about what she thinks. She's got a great palate. She understands the dynamics of what we're doing. She's 150% committed to what we're doing. And she really is the backbone behind all this. I'm a little bit sort of all over the place sometimes in terms of, being involved in many different things on the farm that physically require my attention. So she's always there, able to remind me what to do, when to do it. Even this interview, this chat this evening, at 3:30, I got the message reminding me to be here. Without it, I don't know if I would have remembered. But an extremely important part, a good critic, great for the business, and a wonderful people's person. So, from that aspect, I don't really like to be too much in the eye. I like to sit back behind the scenes. I'm not sort of too big with small talk and chit chat. And Anne's fantastic at dealing with people and liaising with people. And she's a really great face to the business. But there's a hell of a lot that goes on behind the scenes that people probably aren't aware of that she's taking care of. So a great team and a huge important part of the business.
Well, if you look over Craig's broad right shoulder, you can just see the reflection of Anne with the whiteboard, furiously scribbling up exactly what Craig should be saying as our interview plays out. Doing a terrific job, Anne. Thank you. This Pinot Noir, the Chardonnay is magnificent. The Pinot Noir, every bit as such, and it explains why they're in so much demand and so difficult to get hold of. There is one last wine. I do want to touch on it very quickly before we let you get back to the challenges of harvest, because it is a busy time. And it's a grape that I think a lot of people got taken by surprise with, because we know very well the Hemel-en-Aarde is Burgundy, and in Burgundy you make Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And what on earth are you doing trying to make Cabernet Sauvignon in the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley? And then they drank it and realized, actually, this is one of the finest cabs we've ever had. So you did something that was unexpected. You did it with huge success. Was there an inspiration behind that? What was the drive towards producing something that really did take so many people by surprise?
There was no real, I never set out to do it. It wasn't planned. When we bought this property, there were a couple of hectares of Cabernet on it, planted in 98, 99, somewhere around there. And so once we had the property, which we acquired in 2004, it was a no-brainer that I would make some wine from that. And I started so 2005, I made my first Cabernet, and quite surprised when it was actually drinkable. And it just sort of took off from that. It took me quite a few years to figure a lot of things out, because I'm very detail orientated and in trying to match my vineyards to the barrels, to the way I'm making the wine, etc., etc. I won't bore you with those details, but I think it took about 10 years to really figure things out. And I don't come from a winemaking background, so it's not like I've got a history of sitting down and chatting to my father, who was a winemaker, and my father's father, my grandfather. I'm first generation here, so there's a lot to figure out. But it just ended up being a really special wine, and I think part of its attraction is that it's authentic. It's very representative of the vineyards. It's two single vineyards, one called Main Road and one called Dignity, and it's very it's a very honest expression of those vineyards, and it's unashamedly Cabernet Sauvignon. It's 100% varietal, which in itself is quite rare. Most Cabernets are blended with a little bit of something else. Bordeaux, for example, is very rare to find 100% Cabernet Sauvignon coming out of Bordeaux. So it was something very distinctive. Well, it is something very distinctive, something very unique. And fortunately, a great wine too. So put all those factors together, there's a good story behind it. The contents lives up to the discussions or the media surrounding it, and it's something that we've really been able to utilize to drive our brand forward. It's something we're very proud of. It's good to be unique or distinctive, as difficult as that may be sometimes, without being contrived.
Well, it forms part of this wonderful story of yours. One last quick question before we let you go. This is from Grant Sauls, who's a regular watcher over on YouTube. How do we get hold of some of the older vintages of Cab 2013, 2015 difficult to find?
Yeah, look, unfortunately, or I guess maybe fortunately, our wines all sell out as we release them. So a way to get older vintages, and I'm not trying to be funny here, but a way to get older vintages is to start buying or get onto the list for the newer vintages and hold on to them until they become older. But to get back to your original question, I do have a couple of bottles of 13, incidentally, and 15. And if you want to get hold of Anne and remind us of this little conversation, I can hook you up.
All right, there you go. Expect an email from Grant.
That'll be from a private stash. So, yeah, but we'll come and visit. We'll drink and, go and visit the cellar.
I think that sounds like an excellent idea. I remember reading a great piece from Maylou Lambert from a few years ago when you took her in a Land Rover driving all over the place. She had loads of fun. So that is on my agenda. On my agenda right now, though, is to have some more of your quite wonderful Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And say a big thank you, Craig. It's been a long time in the coming, having you on the show, particularly given it's harvest time. I appreciate the time that you've taken away. So thank you. Keep making fabulous wine. Good luck with the 2021 vintage. It sounds particularly exciting, and look forward to getting down to see you in person, taste the wines, and get a first-hand look at that quite magnificent moustache.
Dan, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. And again, thanks to everyone who's joined. And good luck.
There we go. Craig Wessels together with Anne, the team down at Restless River. And a big thank you to Anne for sorting that out for us. Very quickly, Reginald Peckmeyer, when you have Restless River Chardonnay, Ave Maria, your voice is louder than anybody. Craig, ask me, I know. And if you know, Lisa Harlow, I still can't believe that Craig can make a cab in the Hemel-en-Aarde, but I love it. Craig Sherwood, watch out for the shotgun. No idea what that means. Sherwood speaking in code again. And Darryl Balfour tasted that 2013 cab with Craig and Anne last October. Worth seeking it out. I might have to plan a little visit down to the Hemel-en-Aarde sooner rather than later before Grant Sauls buys out all the remaining stock. Just leaves me to remind you, if you haven't done already, to ensure you're part of that Pick and Pay Wine Club. There really is some fabulous wine going at the moment, especially drifting through online and some of the biggest stores. It's all free of charge. SMS your Smart Shopper number to 36775. You get 3 times the Smart Shopper points and all the wine, 20% off 10 great wines every single month. And there are also some cool deals on cases as well as on magnums, and the chance to win cool prizes, be part of competitions, come to great events. It really is a no-brainer. Now that does it for Thursday. Looking at, yes, on Monday, Elunda Basson joins us on Monday as we talk to her about her very first Sauvignon Blanc that she has put her name to at Steenberg. Got a couple of theirs to try, one of the rattlesnakes as well. And we're also heading up to Norhoek and speaking to Skulk about a couple of wines that he has just produced. So that is Monday. Also next week, look out for a vertical tasting that we filmed a little earlier this week at Constantia Glen with Justin Van Veek. I'm going to say goodbye. I am dashing over to the Dan Nichols Show Instagram live channel to chat us over in Hockey International Tyson Dlungwana after last night's conversation with Wade Van Niekerk. Lots of Olympic talk this week on the Dan Nichols Show. And as always, plenty of content coming through on Dan Really Likes Wine. Thanks for joining us. Huge thank you to Craig and to Anna Restless River, as well as to Erika Obermeyer, to Manny, to Wayne Kolevsohn with the Ellerman. And we'll see you back on Monday evening. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.